Our daily Bible reading for March the 3rd. Our reading today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11. Mark chapter 11, we'll begin reading in verse 1. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, Go into the village in front of you, and immediately, as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, Why are you doing this? Say, The Lord has need of it, and we'll send it back here immediately. And they went away and found a colt tied at a door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of those standing there said to them, What are you doing untying the colt? And they told him what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. And he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, May no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who had bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, Is it not written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and scribes heard it, and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. A few thoughts for today. Isn't it odd how things can get out of hand? The law of Moses provided for those who had to come from a great distance so that they could exchange the animals designated for sacrifice for money so that the trip wasn't such a burden. We read in the law in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 24 and 25, And if the distance is so great for you that you are not able to bring the tithe, since the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you when the Lord your God blesses you, then you shall exchange it for money, and bind the money in your hand to go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. This made the trip less of a burden, and when they arrived at Jerusalem, they would be able to purchase whatever they needed. That was the design. Many times those who traveled to Jerusalem for festivals came from great distances and were at the mercy of those at the temple to purchase whatever was needed to fulfill their vows or sacrifices. That's where the trouble starts. In theory, there was nothing wrong with the practice of what the law provided for. However, the human tendency to stray from the commandments took hold, and left unchecked, greed became the motivator, not convenience. Earlier in Jesus' ministry, he had cleared the temple. We read in the Gospel of John, And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a house of merchandise. John chapter 2, verses 14 through 16. So, this was not the first time that Jesus' zeal for God's house had overcome him. Those in the temple that day had lost sight of what the temple was all about. The temple was not for sordid gain at the expense of the vulnerable. The temple was for the gathering of the people to worship the true and living God. Jesus' righteous anger towards those who desecrated holy ground was a zeal we should all have to keep those at bay who would make common that which is holy. A question of the day. Have you ever felt that going to church has become more entertainment than worship? And finally, a thought to meditate on today. Many traditions of men have crept into our worship services in recent years. Knowing how acceptable worship is to be done in spirit and in truth should not be taken lightly. And those are our thoughts for today, March the 3rd.